Hi, this is Georgia Raysman. I'm on Front Up this morning with Richard Raysman, with whom I am deeply related. He's my husband. We're here to talk actually about the experience of being a longtime seasonal resident, and yet with deep connections to Nantucket, mostly through me because I've been here year-round, and also through having come here many years, and the take that a seasonal resident has on the important issues that year-round residents are facing all the time. So, Richard, first, tell us how you started coming to Nantucket, when and how.
Well, I was actually married before I married you. Sorry to mention that on air. And I was a single person in 1980, and I vacationed with friends of mine, the McCarthys, each summer for 2 weeks. And we had to figure out where we would go. And we went to upstate New York, we went to Cape Cod, and then a friend of ours recommended that we come to Nantucket.
And at this point you were with your 2 young children.
I was with my 2 young children, and they had 2 children as well. And the recommendation was to come to Wade Cottages, which is out in Sconset.
That's where everybody starts, in Sconset?
Exactly, and right on the ocean, beautiful views. And we were recommended to come there in 1983. And we came out there and had a great old time. We went to one of my memorable times, because I and Dennis had sons who were about the same age. We went fishing, and the charter fishermen guaranteed that we would catch a fish. So we went to sort of a placid area, and we didn't catch a fish. So we went to a little rougher area, and we still didn't catch a fish.
At this time you were ready to go home.
And the charter fisherman was getting a little nervous, because he guaranteed that he'd give us our money back if we didn't catch a fish. So we finally went to this really rough area, and the boats were going up and down and up and down. Everybody was getting a little seasick, but we caught a fish. So the charter fisherman held up the fish, and he didn't have to refund our money. But we really, at that point, since it was our first time to Nantucket, we really traveled all over the island, out to Madakat, up to Wauwinet. Really, every place was new to us. And Nantucket is like a narcotic. We came here that first time for, actually it was 1 week. And but after that, I just wanted to keep coming back.
And so you came back to Wade Cottages for the successive years, and we met a year and a half or so after that. We
met in 1984, a year after that, and a year after we met, I suggested to you that we come to Nantucket, and you didn't know too much about it. So you agreed, and we came out to Wade Cottages, and the minute we got to Wade Cottages, you looked out the window and looked at the ocean, and that was it for you. You were stuck.
Right. Right. Well, I think what we both learned about Nantucket is that it has something for everybody. You love the beaches. I love the beaches, but I love the architecture. So between the beaches and the architecture, it's been an ideal place. And as we've told people, we have come here ever since, every summer, and extended from 1 week to 2 weeks to 3 weeks to 4 weeks to 5 weeks, at which point we thought it was economical to buy a house. And luckily at that point there was a dip in the real estate market, so we could just about afford to buy a little house, which we did. But then we became people who didn't live on Nantucket year-round, but paid taxes on Nantucket, and fairly high taxes as the years went on. So you take a different perspective, especially with the idea of taxation without representation, because at that point, we're not residents. We didn't go to town meeting. We had no say in what happened on the island. But we still have a deep and abiding interest and love for the island and what happens to it. So when you read these days about where Nantucket is going with things like Surfside Crossing and the increased amount of traffic, I mean, how do you view that? You still live a good chunk of your life off island, in islands or in communities that have traffic lights and have other major problems. And how do you view Nantucket's problems? Do you think we're going to get to be too much like them, or do you think we still have something that will be preserved even with a large development like Surfside Crossing in the offing?
Well, I think that things will be preserved. It's an unusual governing situation that Nantucket has. There's no mayor, they're just selectmen. And with town meeting, this is a true democracy like de Tocqueville wrote about in the 1830s. And somehow it seems to have worked on Nantucket. And even though people complain about traffic in Nantucket, the fact is we have no traffic lights. We just have roundabouts, which are really brilliant as far as planning goes. And so far, it's worked. And even with people complaining about traffic, it's nowhere near the traffic that we have off island. I'm sure Cape Cod has a lot of traffic. One of my coworkers just told me she commutes to New York City and she has to go 6 miles and it takes her an hour to drive the 6 miles.
Yeah.
So
to take a train from there.
Right. She drives from her house to the train, and that takes an hour, and then she has to get on the train. And so even with all the traffic that people are complaining about, it seems to work.
So do you think there's any danger of our becoming too much like a suburb? I mean, a couple of years ago when we fought off the CVS that was going to take the place of the downtown Stop and Shop, the slogan was not to make us look like a suburb, because why would you pay all that money on the ferry and all that money to stay here if all you were doing was coming to another suburb? You're not worried that something like Surfside Crossing or increased traffic will make us look too suburban?
Well, I think you bring up a good point, and I think it's because of the good governance of Nantucket that we haven't looked like a suburb, and we don't have any chain stores here. And that's because the selectmen and the other people who are governing the island, the various committees, are attending to that. So however this island is governed, and I really haven't been involved in any of the governments, and I'm not sure about the ins and outs, they seem to have really done an excellent job because they've kept the character of the island.
Well, do you feel that there's too much overbuilding of just structures like the police building or the big new schools, or do you think that even that is just what's required by circumstances the way they are now?
Well, I was at the police building last night, and it's a wonderful building, and we have a wonderful police department. So I think that anytime anybody lives anywhere, they always complain about, well, it's not the way it used to be. And if you take any community in the United States or anywhere and talk to people about it, old timers, they'll say, well, you know, it didn't used to be this crowded and didn't have this, it didn't have that. And I think Nantucket's the same way. So I think that development has to happen, and you have to allow people to develop real estate. I mean, that's part of the island, and you need free enterprise. And so I think that's happened so far. If you try to cut off development somehow, that really wouldn't be the American way. And with new development, you might get new buildings with new stores, or you get more enterprise happening. And I think it's ultimately good for the island, and there's really no way to stop it other than to cut off free enterprise.
I think you're right. I don't see any way that we could regulate other than saying something like, we're going to just ban construction for the next 5 years, which would put a lot of people on island into unemployment, which would certainly not be a good economic development. Okay, so I have another thought for you. I mean, when we talk to our own friends and people who are seasonal residents, especially in Sconset, do we hear from them about what island issues? How are they viewing these island issues themselves?
Yeah, we don't. I have a number of tennis partners that I play with, and other people that I know here who are seasonal residents, and it never really comes up with us. It's not an issue that we discuss because everybody is so happy coming to Nantucket for their 2 or 2.5 months. And they don't really know about the selectmen and the town meetings and things like that. I happen to know about it because I'm married to you, and you tell me all about it. But the people that I know that are just seasonal residents, they really don't know how Nantucket is governed. They pay their taxes. They're happy to pay their taxes because we live in Nantucket, such a wonderful place. They come here for the 2 months, and they're not really focused on any of these local issues.
Well, I think that's an interesting comment, because that's the assumption that most year-round residents are making, that seasonal residents are not deeply involved in what's happening here on a regular basis, and that they may or may not feel happy about paying their taxes, but they are not interested in what's happening on a governance basis, so their assumptions are probably correct in that regard. The other question that I get once in a while is, well, how would you feel if Surfside Crossing were plunked down right near Sconset?
I wouldn't be very happy about it. I have my little part of Sconset down on Low Beach Road, right across from the ocean. And if there was a lot of extra traffic there and sort of overwhelming the Sconset market and the little rotary that we have in Sconset, I would be very unhappy about it.
And that's of course what they're saying down in Surfside, that they already have more than their share of housing, and that's overburdening Surfside Road and that's overburdening their corner of the island. So then what do we do?
It hasn't come up yet, but if it was down in Sconset, it would not be a good thing for me personally.
And then interestingly, though, behind where we happen to live, behind us there is a large parcel of land that for years has been undeveloped, divided but undeveloped, and just recently, thanks to Ron Bamber, was sold. All these parcels were sold to a developer who was going to put in 30-something new houses. So there will be a development there, and there will be people driving in and out of a road that is right on the corner of where we live. So it's going to be a total of 50-something houses and people in them with whatever secondary numbers of cars. It's not like the scale of Surfside, but it's definitely a new group of people, new numbers of vehicles traveling in and out and going to the market. So is your objection sheer numbers, or is your objection low-income housing mixed in with regular income housing?
I think sheer numbers. I mean, we're talking about there are 30 development lots back there, and they've been there for actually decades. They just haven't been developed. But like I said earlier, I think developers are entitled to develop. They're entitled to build houses, and there will be more traffic, which I'm not terribly happy about, but I'm not unhappy about it. It's a nice neighborhood. And I think development will take some time before they reach their 30 houses, certainly at least 10 years, I would think.
Probably. What do you think about the new hospital? Are you happy with where it ended up being located, or do you think it ought to have been located someplace else?
Well, that was one thing, the way Nantucket is governed, that I didn't agree with. I mean, they had this great place with the water company, great location. And because of politics, they just couldn't get it done. And I thought that was the wrong thing to do. But that's part of the governance of the island. I mean, they found a workaround. But the cottage hospital is really the most important entity on the island. Without the cottage hospital, there would be no Nantucket.
Yeah, you don't have a viable community without a hospital.
You have to have, for emergency purposes or any kind of purposes, you need to have a functioning hospital. And so my view was that that the island should have cooperated with the hospital and put it on the area that the hospital wanted it to be on, because they would have had a larger hospital, a better hospital, and more parking.
And much better access from a traffic perspective.
Better access. Yeah. And so I thought that was a mistake, but it's part of the governance of the island. Luckily, the hospital found a workaround. Hopefully, we're going to get the same quality type hospital on the old hospital area rather than on the Wawinit area.
Yeah, I'm less worried about the quality of the hospital than I am about access, because access at the water company was so much easier for ambulances than trying to work their way around Vesper Lane and those tight corners, even with the new rotary that's being proposed for that area, which is another hot topic of discussion. Rotaries are better for traffic, but they're not necessarily better for school kids crossing in front of them, and which is a big problem right at that corner. But the next thing I wanted to ask you about was housing, because having gone to the Citizens Police Academy myself for the last 8 weeks, the theme I hear over and over again in that venue as well as elsewhere is housing for essential people like police and fire and teachers, and firemen and teachers. And housing is, we have this terrible problem with people either building things like Surfside Crossing, which have a sort of minimum number of additional housing available for low-income people, or covenant houses, which are very small in number and only available for a certain number of middle-ish income, lower middle-income people. And then we have a great number of just ordinary people who can't afford to live here. And how do you see the island trying to tackle that? That seems like a huge problem.
It is a huge problem, and I don't know what the answer is, and the island doesn't seem to be actually very good at resolving the issue. So this is democracy at work, but with real estate values here, it's really very difficult to find housing for, bona fide civil servants, like the policemen, the firemen, the teachers, the hospital workers, the nurses, people who really make this island the great island that it is. And I think that maybe the selectmen really are going to have to be, the leadership of the island really is going to have to be creative and try to figure out a solution.
Yeah.
Nobody seems to have really worked that out at this point.
Yeah, thinking out of the box, I'm thinking of where there can be town land that's used, where there can be bonds sponsored that that underwrite town buildings, the building of housing for town employees or civil servants or related people. It's just it's a really intractable problem, and I think you're right. I think the leadership right now is very good on the select board. I mean, maybe they can come up with some ideas that are outside the box.
Well, it could be a problem that is so intractable that it really affects the island going forward. If the island can't get good, devoted people who are willing to be to work for the community like that.
Or without commuting, which is when you really can't commute on a policeman or
No.
teacher's salary. I mean, even the construction guys can only do that because their salaries are paid by people who are willing to buy expensive houses.
Well, what I learned from going to the civilian police academy with you is that you don't really think about it, but policemen work 24/7, so they work 3 shifts.
Right.
So they have to be available at all times. They just
Right.
can't commute like that.
Right, right, true. Well, it's been very interesting talking with you and hearing your opinions in a more formal way. And I hope that you become a resident at some point and come to town meeting and join some town boards.
Well, thank you, Georgia.
I'll vote for you. Thank you for joining me.